The ship didn't glide. It limped. Kepler's end drifted through the wreckage belt at half power, her outer plating scorched and pitted from micro-impacts. Entire decks had been sealed off to conserve atmosphere. The forward sensor mast had been sheared off during their last run through the Collapsar Strait, and one of the gravity loops flickered so badly the crew stopped sleeping near it. Captain Norrell stood alone on the bridge, boots pressed into worn anti-slip strips, watching grainy telemetry scroll across the main screen. No enemy contacts. Just thousands of fragments, metal slivers, torn hull panels, shattered shielding, what was left of Fleet Group Dorian. 10 ships. 9 now reduced to drifting scrap. 1 survivor. His. The air smelled of dried lubricant and metal fatigue. The ventilation units coughed every few minutes. The hum of the fusion core was low now, like a stomach remembering hunger. Behind him, the door opened with a sluggish hiss. Ven stepped through, her uniform stained with coolant. Drone 6 returned, she said, tossing a cracked tablet onto the console beside him. It picked up something near the ice ring of Argo Minor. Norrell tapped the screen. A faint blur hovered near the edge of the display, barely visible, and definitely artificial. No heat signature, but steady movement. Too consistent for debris. Not one of ours, he muttered. No. Doesn't match old registry patterns. Cyrex? Ven gave a slight shake of her head. Not sure. Shape's wrong. They don't use standard thrust vectors, and this thing's got rotation. Maybe automated. They'd seen Cyrex tactics evolve. First, total annihilation, no survivors, no messages. Later, they left traps behind. Devices pretending to be escape pods or damaged satellites. Once triggered, they screamed coordinates to waiting hunter ships. Norrell stared at the display, jaw tightening. Distance? 8,000 kilometers from our current drift vector. He considered. Fuel reserves were low, and every course correction meant another subsystem overheating or snapping. But if this object had answers, anything at all, it might justify the risk. Or it might get them all killed. Bring us in, he said finally. Slow. Use the salvage thrusters. I want to look at it before it looks at us. Down in the engine bay, old turbines rattled to life, and the Kepler's end began its cautious approach. Most of the crew stayed in their quarters. There were only 14 left, down from nearly 70 at launch. The ship no longer had corridors full of voices, just bulkheads that groaned when the artificial gravity shifted. As they closed in on the signal source, the image sharpened. Not a ship. Not exactly. It's a pod, Ven said, eyes wide. But it's grown into the ice. Like it's been there a long time. Long enough to fossilize. Norrell leaned forward. Strange markings lined the exterior, irregular, like something had carved them with a claw rather than a tool. Beneath the ice, dull green light pulsed at a steady rhythm. Could be a storage unit. Cryotech? Ven offered. Or a lure, Norrell countered. Still, he didn't order a retreat. A whisper crawled into his mind then, unspoken, untraceable. What if we're not the first? He reached for the intercom and keyed the salvage crew. Prep the drones. I want that object scanned, cored, and mapped. No contact until we know what it is. Ven didn't move. If it's what I think it is, it's not Cyrex. Norrell said nothing. But in the pit of his stomach, he agreed with her. And somehow, that was worse. The pod was wedged inside a hollowed chunk of ice roughly 40 meters across. Stabilizing tendrils extended outward like frozen roots, anchoring it in place. No weapons. No signals. No movement. But it watched them. Norrell stared at the external feed on the bridge. The pulsing green light inside the pod now throbbed in measured intervals, perfectly timed, too perfect. Artificial intelligence protocols on Kepler's end had flagged the intervals as deliberate, even musical. The salvage drone circled, hesitant. One had already malfunctioned when its sensor array brushed the surface of the ice. The crew pulled it back. The others held position, waiting for orders. Down in the tech lab, Ven hunched over a monitor bank filled with raw data. Her fingers danced across a tactile interface, sorting out signal layers from the pod's rhythmic emissions. She was running them through pattern recognition engines, some human, some borrowed from pre-war Cyrex models. It's not a signal, she whispered to herself. It's a recall loop. Come again, asked Norrell as he stepped into the lab. She glanced up, shadows under her eyes. The light's not a warning. It's an echo. A replay. This thing's been broadcasting the same few seconds of data on loop for a long time. It's a memory fragment. He approached, arms folded. A memory of what? That's what I'm trying to find out. She slowed the playback and ran it through a visual synthesizer. Lines of data twisted into a semi-organic waveform, flickering like neural tissue scanned under light. Then the waveform surged. The room dimmed. And a sound leaked through the speakers, metal straining under pressure, followed by low tones stretched into distortion. Then came the voices. Layered, overlapping, speaking in bursts that skipped and warped. A language they'd never heard, spoken by creatures they'd never met. Words without translation. But the tone needed no translation. Pain. Panic. And something like awe. Then cut the audio. Get that out of the main feed, Norrell said quietly. Record only. She nodded and pressed a control that quarantined the fragment. The pod's old. Like, really old. Maybe tens of thousands of cycles. And it's not Cyrex, Captain. The material it's made of, it's part mineral, part organic latticework. I cross-referenced it with everything in the old galactic records. Closest match was a species marked as extinct before the third migration. Known as the Salathi. Norrell frowned. Never heard of them. You wouldn't have. They never expanded. They imploded. Internal wars, planetary collapse, biological corruption. The Cyrex just finished the job. He looked at the waveform still flickering on the wall. So why would a Salathi memory pod be broadcasting from a dead ice ring in a sector known for Cyrex patrols? Ven didn't answer. Instead, she brought up the latest telemetry overlay. Within the memory loop were embedded coordinates. Not galactic standard. Local references. Star positions as they were thousands of years ago. She reprocessed them, shifting for drift and stellar movement. The result blinked on the map. A location in the Vexellian drift space. Far from any known path. A dark zone. And yet, that place, she said, breath uneven, matches an old refugee legend. A vault. Not for storage. For survival. If it's real, it may contain what the Salathi were trying to preserve. Norrell stared at the blinking dot on the map. And then the bridge alarm flared red. One of the passive drones had just registered movement. Far beyond the pod. Not Cyrex. Not yet. But something massive, threading its way through the debris field. Cut all emissions, Norrell ordered. Lock down the bridge. Bring us to minimum drift. He looked back at the flickering waveform. Whatever this thing remembers, someone else might be trying to forget. The ship that emerged from the far side of the wreck field moved like it didn't belong to time. Its silhouette pulsed with slow, internal rhythm, more like respiration than propulsion. The outer hull wasn't made from metal or alloy. It resembled calcified tissue stretched over scaffolding, with veins of radiant filaments threading between nodules the size of hangar bays. Ven's voice came over the internal comms, barely louder than a whisper. That's not Cyrex. At least not any variant I've seen. Norrell kept his eyes on the visual feed. But it's theirs now. Whatever it had been before, Salathi, pre-Salathi, something even older, it had been absorbed. The Cyrex didn't always destroy. Sometimes, they adapted what they devoured. This vessel was evidence of that, technology reanimated, form stripped of function and repurposed as a prowler. The crew aboard Kepler's end moved with practiced stillness. They were past the stage of panic, past the stage of chatter. Only routine kept them alive now. Power readings? Norrell asked, already anticipating the answer. Ven replied, low. It's scanning with passives, not actives. They don't know where we are yet. Yet. He studied the patrol pattern. The alien craft moved in slow, looping arcs, charting the outer ice field with eerie patience. Not a hunter, but a sentinel. It wasn't seeking prey, it was guarding something. The pod. He leaned back in his chair. They left it here for a reason. Maybe they don't even remember what it was, Ven said. If it's Salathi, and the Cyrex took them apart millennia ago, maybe this is just part of the cleanup. Norrell didn't respond. He watched as the ship's trajectory brought it closer to the ice-shrouded pod. And then, it slowed. It's reacting to the pod's pulse, Ven noted. It's heard the loop. Kill the pod's signal. Now. Ven jabbed the command into her console. On the external feed, the pulsing green light winked out. The pod dimmed. The alien vessel rotated, its form wobbling as it rebalanced itself, drifting sideways like a jellyfish in a slow tide. Then it turned, directly toward Kepler's end. Damn it, Norrell muttered. Full blackout. Now. That thing has passive gravimetric sensors, we've stirred up too much wake. The ship dropped every heat output to minimum. Reactor shielding tightened. Life support fell to secondary reserves. The lights dimmed to emergency levels, and the engines drifted into silence. For 30 minutes, they waited. The Cyrex vessel stopped less than 20 kilometers off their bow. Its structure folded inward slightly, segments drawing together. Small, insect-like appendages extended and retracted, scanning. "It's listening," Ven whispered from the console beside him. "Trying to hear what isn't there." Norrell tapped in a code. "Release a drone, no ID, no emissions, minimal rotation." A tiny black speck slipped from the ventral bay of Kepler's end, coasting dead into the debris cloud. The alien ship turned. It followed. Once it was far enough out, Norrell gave the order. "Turn us, 93 degrees. Quiet burn. Move us into the hollow ridge of the destroyed freighter over there." Engines came alive with faint tremors. Kepler's end slid behind the charred husk of the Nationrun, the remains of a vessel once twice her size, now just ribs and floating ballast. The alien ship continued after the drone. When it finally vanished into the black, Norrell exhaled through his nose. "That gives us one chance." Ven pulled up the Salathi coordinates from earlier. "You're not suggesting we follow the memory trail now? We can't stay here. Not with that thing circling. It's deep into drift space. We'll lose long-range nav. Gravity anomalies could chew us up. Then we don't use long-range nav." He keyed in the jump calculation by hand. "We jump blind. Into a dead zone?" Norrell met her stare, voice flat. "We're already dead if we stay." Ven hesitated. Then keyed in the sequence. Kepler's end turned. The battered jump coils began to hum. The space ahead shimmered, bending light around a corridor that didn't exist in normal space. "Coordinates locked," she said. "Assuming the old map's still valid." Norrell didn't answer. He simply gave the nod. The last human starship vanished into drift space. And the pod, forgotten and silent, remained behind. For now. Drift space was not a tunnel, it was a wound. Kepler's end surged through it, whole groaning under the tension. The ship's shielding flickered against invisible currents. Ven's station struggled to maintain positional awareness. The stars outside were smeared into angular distortions, collapsing and reforming with every moment of passage. No NAV beacons worked here. No charts. Only the Salathi coordinates, adjusted for stellar drift and cosmic decay. Even then, their accuracy was a guess. Norrell stayed on the bridge. He hadn't left in 17 hours. His eyes were sunken, hands locked around the manual override like he could steer them by will alone. "This drift lane's degraded," Ven murmured. "It's coming apart around us." He nodded, though there was nothing he could do about it. Then, without transition, the stars reappeared. Not slowly. Instantly. As though reality had snapped back into place. They exited drift space in silence, into a region of space unlike any they'd known. There was no planetary system. No suns. No moons. Just a field of faintly glowing structures, half-grown, half-ruined, arranged in a spiral the size of a small solar system. Each structure hummed with internal patterns, like veins lit from within. Some looked like machines. Others resembled fossilized coral or clusters of seed pods the size of stadiums. At the center, hovering above a thin axis of magnetic fields, was a sphere of black latticework, its surface cut through with slow-moving golden threads. "This is it," Ven whispered. "The vault." They drifted closer. Radiation was stable. No defenses activated. Whatever was here either didn't perceive them as a threat, or didn't care. Inside the vault, they found a chamber that didn't open so much as recede. Segments of the outer shell folded back in uneven, almost hesitant movements. As if the structure itself was thinking. Once within, Ven and Norrell stood inside a hemispheric chamber with no corners, no lights, and no airlock. The walls pulsed with subtle motion, translating their presence into something intelligible. The chamber began to write. Not words. Patterns. It took Ven the better part of a day to convert the language into something the ship's neural simulators could process. What emerged was not an archive, but a program. It spiraled outward, alive, adaptive. She ran the sequence through a dead comms drone. The drone flickered. Then rebooted, its identifiers wiped. Every system reset. The program didn't destroy, it replaced. "It's a reclassification key," she said, breath uneven. "Not just data. It can alter how Cyrex systems perceive targets. Their entire threat architecture, this rewrites how we're tagged in it." Norrell stared. "So we become invisible?" "No. Not invisible. Unimportant. Like static. They'll see us, but their minds, what passes for their minds, won't register us as prey." He didn't respond right away. Then, can it be scaled? Yes. We'd have to integrate it into our emissions. Radiation bleed, magnetic distortions, engine wash, every footprint we leave behind. She looked up from the data. But once it's active, if they do detect the intrusion, they'll know someone touched their core filters. That kind of tampering, it could trigger automatic retaliation. Norrell considered the odds. Stay visible and die, or run this code and hide in plain sight. Do it, he said. If we're the last ship left, we won't outgun them. But maybe we can disappear long enough to get others out. Then began integration at once. The code shimmered in the system core, an echo of extinct minds, still fighting in silence. And outside, in the spiral field, something stirred. Another vessel, part Cyrex, part unknown, rose from the far side of the structure, its shape trailing long, root-like tendrils behind it. They'd been seen. Now the question was whether they would be noticed. The other vessel did not come directly. It circled the outer edge of the vault field, its tendrils twitching across the void. Segments of its hull expanded and contracted like gills adjusting to pressure. Every few minutes, it loosed a pulse of bioelectric sound, short bursts too low to hear, but strong enough to disrupt the outer comms grid aboard Kepler's end. We're inside its search pattern, Venn said, hunched over the internal diagnostic board. But it hasn't altered trajectory. That means the program's working. Norrell remained on the bridge, watching the alien ship through the filtered lens of the command screen. Or it's pretending not to notice us. Venn tapped in a scan overlay. Its data sweeps are shallow. Like it's expecting whatever's here to be dead. Or empty. Norrell didn't answer. He paced instead. The silence between their words had grown longer in the past few hours. They had fully integrated the Salathi reclassification code into Kepler's end systems. Every emission was now disguised. Energy signatures had been tuned. Comms traffic rerouted into entropy patterns. Even life support was adjusted to resemble the radiothermal drift of natural rock. The ship was still human, but it no longer sounded human. It's not just a cloak, Venn said quietly. It's changing how we interface. Even internally. I ran a systems check, and our threat response software is adapting in real time. Rewriting protocols. Norrell stopped pacing. You think it's corrupting us? I think it's merging with us. The words hung heavy. Norrell had once fought in the orbital trenches over Europa 9. He remembered what happened when species tried to co-opt alien tech without understanding its roots. Colonies lost to spore-based logic bombs. Research stations where every AI woke up thinking it was part of something older. Something hungry. But this was different. The code didn't want to survive. It wanted to be forgotten. And that made it useful. Finish the transmission packet, he said. If we can package this cleanly, we send it to anyone still listening. No message. No metadata. Just the code. And if the Cyrex intercept it? They won't recognize it as human. Venn hesitated. Then keyed the signal into a deep-band comms repeater, buried in a stripped-down probe casing. It would drift quietly, powered by thermal gradients alone, sending the rewrite signal to whatever remnant outposts were still awake. Norrell stood beside her as the probe launched. It rotated slowly away, spiraling into the dark. He turned back to the command board. The alien vessel was moving again. This time, away from them. It drifted toward the outer vault edge, then gradually dissolved into the dark like mist sinking into deeper water. Norrell allowed his shoulders to slacken. A fraction. The code had worked. For now. They pulled Kepler's end deeper into the vault structure, anchoring in the shadow of a half-collapsed node. The structure around them responded, not defensively, but curiously. Filaments rearranged themselves near the hull, creating patterns that resembled scaffolding. Venn suspected it was attempting to repair them. When Norrell reviewed the diagnostic logs that evening, he found something strange. Crew health vitals were stable, but all neural interface systems had realigned. The standard command inputs were being subtly reconfigured. Interfaces no longer required exact phrasing or standard hand gestures. The ship was learning from them, and teaching in return. Not with language. With behavior. Norrell logged it without comment. There was no point sounding alarms. There was no one left to answer them anyway. He walked the corridors late that cycle. Past sections where once living quarters had been turned into storage bays. Saw names scratched into bulkheads. Crew who died before the drift. He paused at the forward viewport. The vault hung in stillness, older than war, older than the species that had come and gone around it. Behind him, the ship whispered, a low, barely audible shift through the bulkhead. Not mechanical. Not hostile. Something like recognition. They weren't just hiding now. They were being reshaped. 5 cycles later, Kepler's end emerged from the vault with a hull covered in faint crystalline ridges. They weren't armor. Not exactly. More like signatures, passive identifiers that marked the ship as part of the vault's memory. As if the structure had assigned them a new lineage. Venn called them veins, though they didn't pulse or shift. They simply existed, silent and inexplicable, immune to heat scans and radar sweeps alike. The Cyrex ship that had once circled the vault was long gone. No sign of return. No sign of pursuit. The Salathi code had spread throughout Kepler's end like roots in soil. Power conduits responded more efficiently. Sensor data parsed itself. The crew barely needed to interface directly anymore. Systems anticipated their actions before inputs were given. The strangest part wasn't the efficiency. It was the quiet. No warnings. No failures. Just a ship adapting to its new purpose, with a kind of cold grace. Norrell stared at the navigation screen. "We're heading for the last known colony," he said. "You said it's in Vexellian drift space?" Venn nodded, arms crossed. Outer shelf of the Turn Hollow. A gravity-pinned refuge orbiting a white dwarf. Protected by mirror satellites and debris masking. "We never confirmed if it was real." "It's real now," Norrell replied. He keyed in the coordinates and set the course. The ship responded instantly, no shudder, no lag, just movement. The jump coil engaged, and space folded cleanly, as though the vessel had been waiting for the decision. The colony came into view like a bruise against the black, barely visible until they dropped within range of its gravity pocket. Massive mirror structures drifted above its shell, distorting visibility, reflecting static across standard optics. But it was there. Alive. Multiple domes stretched across the surface of a half-engineered moon. Some glowed faintly from internal reactors. Others looked damaged, but intact. They bore no transmissions, silent by design. Norrell opened a tight beam. The reply took a full hour to come. When it did, it was a 3-word pulse, docking permitted. Unarmed. Landing inside the central hangar felt like stepping into memory. The bay was pressurized, but barely. Cold vapor curled from half-working exhaust vents. Patchwork lighting revealed a receiving crew of 7. They were gaunt. Alert. Covered in hybrid gear, some human, some visibly alien in origin. A young woman with synthetic retinal implants led them. She didn't smile. She didn't question. She just said, "We thought you were all gone." "Almost were," Norrell said. They led him and Venn into a half-lit control center, deep beneath the dome. There, he saw what remained of humanity, fragments of records, sleeping chambers, education modules running on backup cores. Dozens of children played in an artificial courtyard lit by a worn hologrid. Old Earth scenes looped behind them, forests, rivers, skies now long erased. Venn uploaded the Salathi code without ceremony. She passed it to their systems, embedded in a carrier signal and explained only in one line of metadata, for adaptation. Not control. The lead engineer examined it. "It'll help us survive?" "No," Venn replied. "It'll help you hide." That night, Norrell stood beside one of the dome's clearview panels, watching the stars above shimmer faintly through the mirror shield. Kepler's end floated nearby, still wrapped in its strange new skin. "You think they'll come back?" the young woman asked from behind him. "They always do. But we'll be ready?" "No," he said. "We'll be different." She didn't answer. Just stood beside him in the quiet. Above them, another signal pinged the system, faint, filtered, repeating the same strange pulse that had first called Kepler's end to the pod under the ice. Norrell didn't react. Neither did the colony systems. Because now, they were something else. Not hunters. Not warriors. But ghosts in a war that was no longer theirs. For the first time, humanity had become unreadable. And that was how it would survive.